Alright, so I'm waiting for the gauges to come in on the Jaggernaut here, and so since I can't do any wiring inside the car, I figured I'd come out here and start working on the engine. And I have the Deutsch connector for running the wiring, and I've decided I'm going to ditch that and do a different wiring setup on here. I've got some other connectors. But one of the things I'm concerned about is the wire for the alternator charging wire and the starter wire. Those both carry a fair amount of current in them, and the normal type of connectors you would use for 18 gauge wire won't carry the kind of current that you need to, the alternator puts out about 50 amps. This alternator does. On a bigger vehicle, you're looking at 100 amps or more. And the starter wire momentarily holds probably around, I don't know how many amperage the starter solenoid draws. I haven't looked that up recently, don't care. It draws a fair amount of amperage though. So since I started looking up for connectors for an automobile for a higher amperage, and they typically don't have them. If you have a higher amperage, like on your alternator or on your starter, typically you'll have a terminal end on either end of that wire, and it's a direct wire to where it's going. They don't like to do connectors when you have that much current going through them. But I want this engine to be something that we can pull out and swap and get running again quickly if need be. And to that end, I'd like to make a harness for this engine and for the spare engine. And so I was trying to figure out what kind of connector I can put on here that will hold 50 amps. I've got a handful of these XT60s laying around. This is, if you're building like battery packs for battery-powered skateboards, stuff like that, or like the trike that I built a while back, these carry up to 60 amps. They got gold-plated pins of decent size. The only issue with them is when you go to put them on. Let's see if I can get this close enough that you can see. You have to solder them. You put a little bit of solder in these divots here on either side, then you solder your wire, and then you lay the wire in here, get it hot enough to where the solder melts the wire into this terminal, and you've got to get it down in there a little bit. It's kind of finicky, but when you get them in there, they're nice and secure, and they carry a lot of current. So that's what I'm going to put here. I've got this one already on the engine. Now I've got to make the harness for the car side, which is going to be these two wires here. And you have to make sure and get your little cap on there first before you start connecting it up. So I'm going to have to slide this onto here. I'm going to have to cut this wire back anyways, but and then I'll trim these wires to length and solder them up, and I'll solder this piece up and make a connector that I could connect the high amperage junctions with. And then I'll start working on making my connector for the rest of the wires. I've got to have my coolant temp sensor wire. I've got to have the choke wire. I've got to have the ignition wire. I'll get those done and make a harness for them. All right, so I got the XT60 connector done here. It's not a positive connection, like as in a clip. It doesn't have a clip to hold it together. It's a friction connection, but they're pretty sturdy. I haven't had a problem with them coming apart, so that's pretty much done there. Now I've got to do the rest of the wiring. I've got the circuit for the alternator going to the dummy light on the dash. I've got choke. I've got water temperature and the distributor. And I didn't show this earlier, but I bought a connector for an HEI, and it comes pre-wired with a red and green wire on it. But I went ahead and took the terminal all the way out and put my own terminal in there with the correct color wire, because I don't want to have splices. I'm trying to avoid splices as much as possible since I'm doing a fresh, brand new installation of wiring all around the car. The only place I have a splice so far is on the rollover switch, because I couldn't, the terminals I have don't fit in there. I could go out and find the right terminals and buy them, but I didn't want to buy 100 terminals for two. So this is 4, and then the oil pressure, that's 5 wires I got to make a connector for. So I'll have a grand total of 7 wires on this engine, not counting the ground strap and the main power cable to the starter. So those two are going to remain bolt on. There's no way I'm going to try to make a quick connect for those. That's a little too far for me. But so I've got this wiring kit, Amazon cheapskate Chinese wiring kit, and it flat out works. I like it. So that's what I'm going to wire everything up with. I've got a 5-pin here. I'm going to get out pieces for that. I had a 4-pin out, and I just realized that, the 4-pin's wrong. I've got 5 wires to run, not 4. So they've got little, I'm sitting here holding it over here out of this side. It's got little weatherproofing pieces here. The terminals are, not very expensive. I think this whole kit cost me like 20 bucks, and it makes a whole bunch of wiring connections. I've used them for a while now. I haven't had a problem with any of them. So you don't need to go out and spend $20 a connector to do good wiring. And this is one of the secrets to doing this stuff cheaply. Now, when you're putting your connector on here, there's a consideration something you have to think about here. Which end of the connector do you want where? So you got your terminal here. This is going to be the female ends, and this is going to be the male ends. The little prongs are going to be sticking up here, and they're going to go into this. When I'm wiring, I want to think about it as, when I have this unplugged, what's going to be safest. Fortunately, these are, your male pins are tucked inside here, and your female pins are inside here. But normally I want the female ends to be on the power side of things. That way it's a little harder. I could drop something in here and short this out, but I can't drop anything in here because the pins are isolated from each other. So this is going to be on the power side of the circuit, in other words, the firewall side, and this is going to be on the engine side. And that'll keep me a little bit safer if we have to do maintenance of the track or something. So that's consideration. Think about that before you go pinning stuff up. And then also remember, whenever you go to wire these up, to get these little tiny little dorky things on your wire before you put the connections on them. I can't tell you how many times I've got the little connectors, the little pins on the wire, then realized I forgot the insulator, had to slide it over it, and they'll get cut up on these edges whenever you go to slide them on. So don't forget to get those on there before you wire it up. Now, what order do you put these wires in when you put them in here? Well, I got my wiring diagram here, and I'm going to try to follow this. My choke is going to be on the far inside, then my coolant, then my oil pressure, then my distributor, and then the, here it is, the alternator wire is going to be the furthest over. And so my alternator wire, I actually ordered the correct, this is wire off the old Jaguar harness. This is the original Lucas wire. And because it's not striped the same way as the rest of the wires, I did go ahead and order some. I don't know how long it's going to take to get in, so I'm not actually going to wire that one up today. But I'm going to put the rest of these in this connector and get it ready for this last wire. Also, if you saw the other day, I had to run a white and black wire, and I had to scavenge some white and purple wire off the old harness. I ordered that as well, so I'll get in there and replace that sometime the next week or so when that wire comes in. All right, so I've got my wires ran, except for that last wire. I've got my connectors made. They go together. I haven't put the locking tabs in here yet because I need to get that last wire in. Once I get that last wire run and connected, I just have this wire in place of it right now. I'm not going to bother wiring it up though if I've got the wire coming that quickly. But once I get that last wire, I'll put it in there, and that'll be my wiring harness for the engine. I'll have 2 connectors right here, and that's, once I undo both those connectors, I just have the negative strap here and the positive battery cable on the starter, and the whole engine can come out. That's a whole lot easier than going through and taking that connector loose, take that connector loose, take that connector loose, take that connector. At the racetrack, if you got to get an engine in and out, that's too long. So got that done, and I'm going to police up my area, get it cleaned up, get it ready for whenever I get this other wire in, and I'm going to do some more work elsewhere on the car. So I realized that last picture I had didn't look very clean under here, and honestly I did want to see how it was going to look with everything laid out a little bit better. So I went ahead and got the zip ties out and zip tied this up, and I am going to put this in the vinyl sheathing whenever it's done and ready to rock and roll. Dropped that, didn't I? And so this is a little more representative of what it's going to look like here. I'm going to have the sheathing covering everything up to here, to this point. I don't know if I'm going to see these two wires back here. I probably will, but it'll look all nice and neat and tidy. So just because it looked like a bundle of snakes a couple minutes ago doesn't mean that's how it's going to end up. And I do still have, you know, the headlight wiring and fan wiring to run up here also. So those aren't in the picture yet, but I'll get to working on those soon, and I'll show how I lay that out. And usually when I run wire, I do want to run one branch up the side here to the front to run both headlights. But I think just the way it's laid out, the entire core support on this car is removable. This comes out, and so does the radiator. So I have a big open channel there. I could run the headlight wiring down there in that channel, but honestly, I think I really want to split it back there, run one down this way to the fan, or to the headlights, and then run the other branch down here to the fan and headlights. The fan connector is right here. So, but we'll see. I may change my mind on that. I may run it all down this side and then run it across to that headlight and turn signal and marker light. So we'll see.